Great, thank you very much. Okay, this paper is part of a larger project about policy feedback. And the central insight of policy feedback theories is that receipt of government services, receipts of government benefits influences civic engagement and political engagement. Several different mechanisms have been suggested. Paul Pearson, for example, early on, suggested that programs can be a source of material resources and they can be a source of incentives for political action. So in terms of resources, benefits can make up for factors like low education, a lack of income that would otherwise depress political engagement. In terms of incentives, people who are receiving these benefits have an incentive to get involved politically, perhaps to protect the benefits, maybe to even expand the benefits. Plus, they're going to have a greater sense of the relevance of politics, of government, to their day-to-day lives. The other argument that Paul Pearson makes is that programs have interpretive effects. They can be sources of information. They can enhance awareness of what governments actually are doing, and they can also help to foster a sense of civic obligation, of civic duty to get involved in political and civic life. Joe Soss has built on this notion of interpretive effects. He's developed a political learning approach. And the basic idea here, you can see from the quote, is that the design of programs influences the sorts of experience that recipients have and the lessons that those experiences impart. So he's interested in people's sort of everyday interactions with government bureaucracy. And the underlying idea here is that people are apt to generalize these experiences. So they have a positive experience or they have a negative experience interacting with some agency, and they generalize from that to politics and government at large. But obviously, people's experiences are going to differ, and so we can expect the policy feedback effects to differ as well. So the first, the most obvious distinction is the distinction between means-tested programs and non-means-tested programs. So people who are receiving welfare, they're apt to be viewed as undeserving, they're apt to be viewed as dependents, they can be stigmatized, their lives are subject to a great deal of surveillance and a great deal of control. So we can expect that the sort of experiences they have, the lessons that are imparted to them, are disempowering ones. And there is research showing that the more means-tested programs people have used across their lifetimes, the less likely they are to vote. The more universal programs they've used across their lifetimes, the more likely they are to vote. But this distinction between means-tested and non-means-tested programs seems to be too blunt. But a lot hinges on the actual design of the program, and particularly the authority relations, whether the program is very hierarchically structured or not. So if you have a program that's actually structured according to more democratic principles, then you can actually have positive feedback effects from means-tested programs. There's also evidence suggesting that the very same program can have different feedback effects depending on people's experiences, depending on how they interpret those experiences. A final distinction, and it's one that was sort of touched on in a way in the previous presentation, relates to visibility. So here the idea is that as social programs have been restructured, more and more benefits are actually administered through the tax system. So the earned income tax credit in the US, the home mortgage deduction, which we don't actually have in Canada. The idea is that these have actually served to dampen civic and political engagement because they make the role of the government less visible to people. So all of the studies I've sort of been referring to so far have been based on the United States. And the United States is not a typical welfare regime. It's seen as being sort of the archetype of a liberal welfare regime. So I think it's important that we look at policy feedback effects in different sorts of welfare states. And I've actually chosen to focus on Canada. So Canada, like the United States, is conventionally classified as a liberal welfare state. But it's not as robustly liberal as the American welfare state. If we look at social insurance, I've put up some figures here. Social insurance programs in Canada are more generous. There is paid maternity leave at the national level. There's paid parental leave at the national level. The period of eligibility for unemployment benefits runs anywhere from 36 weeks to 45 weeks. In terms of welfare itself, social assistance, as it's known in Canada, there's been neoliberal restructuring. There's been restructuring along more paternalistic lines. Receipt of welfare can be tied to workfare provisions and so on. But the neoliberal restructuring has been much less thoroughgoing in Canada. There's no time limit on the receipt of welfare. So Canada makes an interesting case for comparison, I think. The data that I'm using come from a two-wave online panel survey. The panel included a large oversample of people who are or have received needs-assisted benefits. The survey was conducted in Ontario. It's Canada's largest, most populous, most socially diverse province. We asked people about 11 different social programs, chose social programs that vary in the way that they are structured, that vary quite widely. People who'd used social assistance or up to 3 other programs were asked follow-up questions about those programs. They were asked about their contact. Have you ever contacted an office about these programs? How were you treated? So was the treatment slow or fast? Was it helpful or unhelpful? Were you treated respectfully or not? How were you left feeling? Were you left feeling really badly about yourself, or did you leave feeling pretty good about yourself? So those are the data, basic data. The first analyses focus on the relationship between use of a particular program and various forms of political and social activity. And it's not indicated here, there's no space, but obviously controlling for various other social background characteristics that could affect civic and political activity. The test here is quite a tough test because all of the programs are being considered simultaneously. I've presented the results here in the form of differences in predicted probabilities because I think they're much more interpretable. So I start off here with 3 means-tested programs. Social assistance is what you would in the US, I think, simply refer to as welfare. And there's really nothing here in the results to suggest that receiving these sorts of benefits depresses political activity. There is, though, there are people who've received welfare a little less likely to volunteer, and not surprisingly, a little less likely to have made a donation to charity. Student assistance and housing assistance are also means-tested programs, but they differ. People who receive these benefits don't have a caseworker. They're not subject to very much intrusion into their private lives. They're not subject to any sort of surveillance and so on. What we see in the case of student assistance is that, if anything, people who've received student assistance, even controlling for level of education, tend to be more active both politically and in their communities. Housing assistance, nothing there to suggest that people who live in subsidized housing are somehow less politically active or active in their communities. In fact, interestingly, they're more likely to have made a complaint to local authorities about some problem in their neighborhood or whatever. The next set of programs are social insurance programs. Based on research in the United States, we would expect that these programs would have positive policy feedback effects. They're programs that are very visible, they're contributory, they can be considered universal in the sense that Social Security is universal. In the case of maternity benefits, we don't see any positive policy feedback effects. They're as likely to participate or not as non-recipients. In the case of unemployment benefits, not noticeably more active than people say who got student assistance. Finally, we have the programs that are not visible, programs administered through the tax system, very mixed in terms of the visibility hypothesis, whether the effects are negative or positive, or there are no effects, depends on the program and the type of activity. So overall, the results don't seem to be that consistent with the results from the US. And obvious question is why, especially in the case of welfare. One explanation could be that it's a nicer, kind of gentler place up north than maybe we'd like to think so. Maybe welfare recipients are just treated well. Well, it turns out you can see that people who've received either form of welfare are the most likely to have had negative experiences, followed by 2 other programs that are means tested, but unemployment benefits, interestingly, a social insurance program is in there. Is there a relationship between having a negative experience or not and civic and political activity? The basic story is either no effect or positive effects of negative experiences. Finally, new paternalists have been rather pessimistic about the effect of heavy reliance on government programs, that people who are heavily reliant on these programs are going to shirk their civic responsibilities. We see no evidence of that here. The more programs used, to the extent that there are effects, the more likely people are to be engaged politically or in their communities. So, why the difference? Why are the findings so at odds with the American findings? I don't have a really good answer. Why, in particular, people who've had negative experiences? I think one possibility is that people develop a sense of personal political agency. They develop politically relevant skills as they try to navigate a sort of complex web of rules and regulations and try to resolve problems with an unfriendly system. Whatever the explanation is for the difference, I think the sort of most important message from this research is that we need to expand the range of countries in which we examine policy feedback effects to see how typical the American experiences are. Thank you.